How you doing, everybody? Welcome back to Before I Forget. This is my video channel, inspired by my Instagram channel, 1985 Road Dog. Today, I was talking to somebody, an old friend, and this subject came up, this concert. It was a Limelight show. Basically, it was Stephen Pearcy's band, After Rap. What would they call? Arcade? I think they were called Arcade. He was the headliner, but then at the last minute, there was a jam at the end with Eddie Van Halen and Vince Neil and Steve Stevens that overshadowed that. So that is the real story there. Anyway, so, I was a DJ at Limelight for many years, I don't know, long time. Sunday nights, Rock and Roll Church, Rock and Roll Church and Limelight were very legendary and very well known as a club, not only for cutting edge live music, whether it was alternative, rock, punk, whatever. And also the rave scene and the techno scene and the club kids all came out of Limelight at the same time, early mid-90s. Limelight was open 6 nights a week and was packed every night. It was a very special venue. It was in an old church, if you don't know that. But Limelight Rock and Roll Church Sundays, I mean, everybody played there from, Pearl Jam and Rage Against the Machine to LA Guns, Guns N' Roses, every hair metal band. Legendary venue. Limelight opened, I want to say Limelight opened around 83. And Peter Gation became the club king of Manhattan, of New York City. Had 4 clubs going at the same time. He kind of ruled nightlife, but Limelight was his core club and what made him and gave him his status and his name and his fame, so to speak, in New York. So Rock and Roll Church every Sunday were bands, but also it had a built-in crowd. Limelight was, I want to say on Sundays, there were a good 300 to 500 people every Sunday that would just come into Limelight no matter what was going on. It was the regular crowd. Those are the people that might have had free admission at the door or reduced admission at the door or got a couple drink tickets. But those were the core people that kept the night going no matter who played. So if it was a big night or a big band, it would be over the top. There'd be people online all night waiting to get in because it's too crowded. They can't even let any more people in. So it was, I would say Limelight, it was an old church. So the main room where the bands played was, it was a good sized room, but it was a small part of the venue. There were other rooms and upstairs and the VIP room upstairs in the old library and stuff. So the club was, I don't know, maybe 2,000 people fit in Limelight at any one time. Limelight always, in those days, it was pre-social media. You promoted from handouts and flyers and word of mouth. People that were promoters or people in the scene that worked in the scene that were promoting the night, they'd be out at other clubs and concerts and networking and talking to people and handing out flyers, come to the night, blah, 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 blah. So Limelight was always a solid club. So the promoter there at the time, Nicky Camp, was handling all the bookings, really. He was talking to the agents and all that stuff. So at the time, Stephen Pearcy had this new band, Arcade. Rat was over. This is like, I want to say, I don't know, this could be 1993, maybe, around in there. 92, 93, I could be off a little bit on the time. He had this band Arcade, Rat was over, and, grunge had rolled in and kind of decimated metal, hair metal, glam metal, whatever. I mean, kind of decimated that glam metal scene. Not metal, but glam metal. So, I'm sure Pearcy was, feeling that, and, it was... In my dealings with Stephen Pearcy, and there weren't many back in the LA Guns days when I worked for LA Guns, he was, he was a bit cocky, a little bit of an attitude. I mean, I could see that right away. So I didn't even try to go any further than how you doing, you know what I mean? It was just, I could tell. So anyway, Arcade is booked to play Limelight, Rock and Roll Church on a Sunday. I think it sold pretty well, ticket-wise. It was always going to have a crowd because it's Limelight. But I don't know, ticket-wise, I think it sold okay. So Nicky Camp, the promoter, was friendly with Steve Stevens and had known Steve Stevens from the Billy Idol days, Rebel Yell, and all that stuff. So what was happening was, because this is how promoting a club in New York City at the time worked. You always, anybody could book a band, but you wanted to make an event. You wanted to make a night, things that people talked about that would bring people to the room for weeks and weeks afterwards, because it's, just reinstated how hot the club was. So Arcade, Stephen Pearcy playing at Limelight Sunday night. I think I don't know where it was. It was either Madison Square Garden or across the river in New Jersey at the Meadowlands. But it was Van Halen headlining, and the opening band was Vince Neil on his Vince Neil solo thing that he did after Motley Crue. I can't remember the name of the album, the names. I don't know. I think the cover was like silver. His face was silver. I could be wrong. But so Nicky is, networks with all the people in the scene, and everybody's talking to each other, and everybody knows each other, and Steve Stevens is an old friend. So they reach out to Steve Stevens, and they arrange a late night jam at Limelight. So Limelight, legal closing time is 4 a.m. But, they would go later than that if there was a crowd. They couldn't serve liquor, but they could keep it open. Anyway, so they arranged a late night jam after the Arcade set of Vince Neil and Steve Stevens and Eddie Van Halen with other, people that were going to jam and play bass and drums and all this kind of stuff, because in New York, there's a million guys that'll be like, the jam guys. We need a drummer. So-and-so is going to come jam. Okay, this is the guy. They just throw him up there and they rent a kit from SIR or whatever. I don't know how that all went down with the equipment and everything, but it was definitely Vince Neil, Steve Stevens, and Eddie Van Halen jamming. So now Stephen Pearcy in Arcade, who were on Epic Records. I'm pretty sure they were on Epic. So they had a big label behind them, but, no one was really... Arcade wasn't getting any airplay. It wasn't like a big thing. They weren't like on MTV. And MTV was playing grunge at this point. So Arcade was like no one really cared. And Stephen Pearcy, who was in a huge band, Rat, was feeling that, I'm sure. So when he found out that he was the headliner, and that was supposed to be it after him, and then there was going to be a jam afterwards. Not only was there going to be a jam, but there was going to be a jam with Vince Neil, who, those guys, same scene, grew up in that scene together, whatever, love each other, but secretly are like, going to do whatever they can to top the other guy in any situation. They're very competitive, old friends, but So Vince Neil is jamming with Steve Stevens, who's a great guitar player, and Eddie Van Halen from Van Halen, who's the headline act at this show, at the arena. And, Pearcy knows Van Halen. I'm pretty sure from what I've heard and read that he had contact with the Van Halen camp in the early days. So he hit the roof. He was just like flipped out. And it caused a huge scene. Huge. So Pearcy ends up, at the end of the story, Pearcy ends up pressuring ICM, who was his booking agent, to stop booking bands at Limelight, and it became a huge thing. Peter Gatien, the owner of the clubs, got involved, and it became a big to-do because ICM was saying, you fucked my band, and we're not booking any shows at Limelight anymore. Which then led to Nicky, I think that was what led to Nicky leaving Limelight and went to Webster Hall and did a bunch of big shows at Webster Hall, and I was there for some of that. And I was back at Limelight, though, afterwards. There was a different promoter. But that night was like, think about it. in glam metal, hair metal terms. There's Stephen Pearcy and Rat, and there's Vince Neil and Motley Crue. Okay, friendly, yeah, competitive, always wanted to be the guy that got the hottest chick. So, you know, and if you really look at the success of those two bands, Motley Crue as a band with an image, well, way bigger than Rat. Rat, though, with Round and Round on that first album, had a huge radio song, way bigger than Motley at the time. So they were very competitive, they were friendly, but can you imagine Stephen Pearcy is in Arcade and they're playing Limelight, headlining Limelight, which is a good venue and a good night to headline there. And his, you know, competition, Vince Neil, is opening up for Van Halen at the arena. And they're coming in and going to jam after his set. And no one will remember him. And everyone's going to talk the next day about Eddie Van Halen jamming with Vince Neil at Limelight. And that's what happened. And it became a huge thing with ICM. Stephen Pearcy went crazy. And, you know, that was, I think that was the end of Nicky at Limelight. I can't remember exactly. But there's a picture out there floating around. I might even have a picture of the security guys from Limelight back in the office with Vince Neil and Eddie Van Halen. It's floating around out there. But I mean, you know, that was a, you know, it was a 5 a.m. night at Limelight that night. But that's what made a club hot. And how did people know? So in other words, once you get the confirmation that there's going to be a jam and it's going to happen, you tell 10 of the right people, and then it spreads through the grapevine and everyone's talking about it, and Limelight is packed to the gills. And that's what happened. But it really got packed on the second half of the night toward the end, because that's when everybody knew the jam was happening. But that's the way the clubs worked back then. The word got out, and, you know, I mean, what did they have to do to get those guys to come jam? We had to provide equipment, had to send limousines for everybody. That's what they did. And Peter Gaisham's like, do it, you know. So that's what went down, and it happened. But Stephen Pearcy got upstaged that night and caused a huge ruckus at Limelight. And but it was people still talk about that night. So that's the point. Anyway, I wanted to jump on and tell that story real quick because I was talking about it, and I had really forgotten about that story. But yeah, the Limelight Vince Neil Eddie Van Halen jam night. It was a classic. Look for that picture out there. If I have it, it's not my photo. I'll try to post it somewhere. But yeah, thanks for tuning in, guys. Listen to me babble away. My Instagram is 1985 Road Dog. My book is on sale via Amazon globally. Tales from the Gutter and Other Rock and Roll Shenanigans. Appreciate you listening, tuning in. Speak soon. Ciao.